Imagine, if you will, standing alone on the windswept steppes of ancient Eurasia, where the horizon stretches unbroken beneath a sky that has never known the lights of cities or the smoke of hearths. In that profound quiet, with only the rustle of tall grasses and the distant call of unseen creatures, you might feel the weight of time itself pressing gently around you, older than any written record, older than the first villages that would one day rise from the earth. It is here, in landscapes like these, that the story of the grey wolf begins, a creature whose lineage reaches back into the Pleistocene epoch, when ice sheets still gripped much of the northern hemisphere and vast herds of mammoth and bison roamed the open tundra. From Europe across Asia to the farthest edges of North America, these wolves established themselves as one of the most adaptable predators the world has ever known. Their presence felt in forests, mountains, and plains alike, wherever prey could be found and the seasons allowed survival. Wherever you are right now, whether the sun has just risen or the night is drawing in, I would love to know where you are listening from and what time it is there. It feels quietly wonderful to picture all of us, scattered across the globe, sharing these same ancient echoes together. That sense of connection seems fitting when we turn our thoughts to wolves, whose lives have always depended on something larger than any single individual. Their success as hunters came from a remarkable combination of physical power and intricate social behavior, strong jaws capable of cracking bone, keen senses that could track a scent for miles, and a body built for endurance over long distances allowed them to bring down animals many times their size. Yet it was the pack itself that turned these traits into true mastery. Within the group, wolves learned to cooperate with precision, communicating through subtle postures, howls that carried across valleys, and an unspoken understanding of roles that shifted with the needs of the hunt or the raising of young. This social intelligence, this willingness to rely on one another across changing conditions, created a resilience that let grey wolves thrive through ice ages and warming periods alike. Yet even as these wolves dominated their world, subtle changes were already stirring in their genetic story. Modern wolves carry only part of the ancestry that once existed. Ancient wolf populations, now vanished, held a broader diversity of genes shaped by the fluctuating climates of the Pleistocene. Somewhere among those lost lineages a divergence began. Certain groups of wolves started to separate genetically from the main populations we recognize today, their DNA drifting in ways that would eventually open the door to something new. The precise moment of that split remains wrapped in mystery, but what is clear is that it set the stage for a relationship that would reshape both species. Competing theories place the first steps toward domestication at very different times and places. Some evidence points to events as early as 40,000 years ago in regions of Asia or Europe, where wolves may have lingered near human hunting camps, drawn by scraps and the safety of firelight. Others suggest a more recent beginning, perhaps 15 or 20,000 years ago, possibly in multiple locations across Eurasia. As humans and wolves gradually learn to tolerate and then depend on one another, still further ideas propose that the process unfolded not once but in several separate episodes, with different wolf populations contributing to the dogs we know today. What has transformed our picture of this transition more than anything else is the patient work of DNA analysis. By comparing the genomes of ancient wolf remains with those of early dogs and modern breeds, scientists have uncovered connections that stone tools and cave paintings alone could never reveal. We now see that the wolves who became dogs were not necessarily the direct ancestors of today's grey wolves, but rather members of populations that carried a distinct genetic signature, one that included traits favouring tameness and a shorter flight distance from humans. These studies also hint at a more complex journey than simple domestication, one that may have involved periods of interbreeding between early dogs and wild wolves, allowing useful traits to flow in both directions. Each new sample from a Siberian permafrost grave or a European cave floor adds another thread to the tapestry, reminding us that certainty is still some distance away, and that the full map of the wolf-to-dog passage continues to shift with every discovery. As these genetic clues accumulate, they invite us to picture the slow, almost imperceptible changes that must have unfolded across generations. A wolf, less fearful of human scent, might have found easier meals. Its offspring, inheriting that same reduced caution, could have stayed closer still, until the line between wild hunter and tolerated companion blurred beyond recognition. The landscape itself was changing too, with retreating glaciers opening new corridors for movement and early human groups following the herds that wolves had long pursued. In that shared movement across continents, the foundations of a partnership were quietly laid, one that would later echo through every civilization yet to come. Picture yourself now beside the flickering light of a small fire on the edge of an ancient forest clearing, where the smoke drifts upward into a sky still untouched by any permanent roof or chimney, and the surrounding darkness holds both promise and uncertainty. In that quiet space, with only the crackle of burning wood and the occasional rustle from unseen creatures beyond the glow, you might sense the first delicate threads of a connection forming, older than any written law, older than the earliest villages that would someday rise along river banks, older even than the shared hunts that once defined survival for both wolf and human. It is here, in moments like these imagined across the vast stretches of Eurasia, that the transformation we call domestication likely began, though the precise path remains layered with competing possibilities and gentle mysteries that continue to unfold with each new discovery. One pathway that scholars often consider involves what we might call self-domestication, where certain wolves, drawn by the scent of discarded bones and the warmth of human fires, began to linger at the outskirts of hunting camps without any deliberate invitation. These animals, perhaps less wary by nature than their more cautious kin, found reliable scraps left behind after a successful hunt, and over generations their offspring inherited that same tolerance for proximity, gradually shifting from wary observers to tolerated companions who might even alert the group to approaching danger in exchange for safety. This process would have unfolded slowly, almost invisibly, as wolves that ventured closer survived better during lean seasons, their reduced flight response becoming a quiet advantage that humans, in turn, grew accustomed to noticing. Alongside this possibility stands the idea of more active involvement, in which early humans might have occasionally taken young wolf pups from dens discovered during travels, raising them within the circle of the camp as living experiments in trust and utility. Such captured pups, fed from the same hands that shaped tools and tended fires, could have grown into adults whose loyalty strengthened the group's ability to track game or guard against intruders, creating a feedback loop where the humans who succeeded at this raising passed on both knowledge and perhaps a preference for animals with gentler dispositions. Neither pathway excludes the other entirely, and the evidence scattered across bone fragments and genetic traces suggests that both currents may have mingled at different times and places, each contributing threads to the emerging bond. As these interactions deepened across countless seasons, physical shifts began to mark the wolves who stayed near humans, changes that would distinguish their descendants from those that remained fully wild. Skulls grew slightly smaller and more compact, jaws less powerfully built for cracking large prey, yet better suited to varied diets that now included human leftovers. Coat patterns diversified, with patches of lighter fur appearing where once only uniform greys or blacks prevailed, perhaps aiding camouflage amid the mixed shadows of camp life rather than open tundra. Ears that once stood rigidly alert softened into gentle folds, a trait that would later become familiar in countless breeds, while tails curled more readily, and bodies overall trended toward a range of sizes that reflected the abundance or scarcity of shared resources. Central to these transformations lies the concept of neoteny, the retention of youthful features well into adult life, as if the developmental clock slowed in those wolves whose survival now depended on human tolerance rather than fierce independence. Juvenile wolves naturally display softer expressions, playful curiosity, and a willingness to seek guidance from elders. In the emerging dogs, these qualities persisted beyond the usual age, turning what had been temporary traits of the young into permanent characteristics of the species. This retention likely conferred advantages in a world where cooperation with another intelligent species mattered more than solitary prowess. Allowing dogs to read human gestures with remarkable sensitivity and to maintain an enduring playfulness that strengthens social ties across generations. A striking window into how such changes could arise appears in the long-running fox farm experiments conducted in Siberia, where researchers began selecting the most approachable silver foxes from fur farms and breeding them together without any direct training for tameness. Within just a few generations, the offspring began to exhibit precisely the kinds of shifts seen in early dogs: ears that flopped forward, coats marked by white patches, tails that curled upward, and skulls that narrowed in ways reminiscent of domesticated canids. Even more remarkably, these foxes started to seek human contact, wagging their tails and whining for attention much like puppies, revealing that selection for a single behavioral trait, reduced fear of people, could trigger a cascade of physical and temperamental alterations without any conscious effort to shape appearance. The experiment underscores how domestication might operate through subtle pressures rather than grand design, illuminating possibilities for the wolves of long ago whose own tameness may have unlocked similar cascades under the gaze of early human companions. Yet any attempt to fix a single moment for these beginnings quickly encounters the broad span of proposed timelines, stretching from perhaps 40,000 years ago in scattered Asian or European locales to as recently as 15 or 20,000 years ago in multiple Eurasian regions. The range remains wide because different lines of evidence, from ancient DNA extracted from permafrost, remains to the distribution of early dog-like bones near human sites, point toward overlapping or even separate episodes rather than one clean origin story. Some populations of wolves may have begun the journey during the height of the last ice age, when retreating glaciers created new corridors for both humans and animals, while others entered the process later as climate stabilized and settlements grew more permanent. Genetic studies further complicate the picture by showing traces of later interbreeding between early dogs and wild wolves, suggesting that the boundary between the two stayed porous for millennia, and that useful traits could flow in both directions long after the initial divergence. What emerges from these layers is less a straight line of descent than a slow, branching conversation between species, one in which curiosity and mutual benefit gradually replace suspicion. The same social intelligence that once allowed wolves to coordinate hunts now found new expression in reading the intentions of human partners, while humans gained alert companions whose senses extended their own awareness across dark landscapes. As the glaciers continued their retreat and forests reclaimed former tundra, these early dogs travelled alongside migrating groups, their presence quietly shaping the rhythms of daily life in ways that would later echo through every settled community yet to form. Each new fragment of bone or sequence of DNA adds another brushstroke to this unfolding portrait, reminding us that the partnership we inherit today rests on choices made in firelight and uncertainty, choices whose full consequences continue to reveal themselves across the long arc of shared history. As the first tentative bonds between humans and those early canids stretched across the retreating ice and into the warmer centuries that followed, one might stand today amid the ruins of what would become the cradles of civilization and sense how that quiet partnership had already begun to weave itself into the very fabric of settled life. Along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, where the first true cities rose from the silt, dogs appear in the faint impressions left on clay tablets and in the scattered bones beside human dwellings, their presence suggesting roles that extended far beyond the hunt. Some scholars trace how these animals, perhaps descendants of the more tolerant wolves who had lingered near fires, served as guardians of granaries and herds, their sharp senses alerting communities to threats in the night while also joining in the pursuit of game across the floodplains. In the temples and households of ancient Mesopotamia, they may have carried additional layers of meaning, appearing in stories as protectors or even intermediaries in rituals whose details remain partially obscured by time, inviting us to wonder whether certain lineages were already being shaped for steadier temperaments suited to life among people rather than the open wild. Further west, along the Nile, a similar unfolding can be glimpsed in the careful depictions on tomb walls and the mummified remains that speak of a deepening companionship. Here dogs walked beside hunters in the marshes, their lithe forms flushing birds or tracking larger prey through the reeds. Yet they also rested in the shade of noble estates, as favoured companions whose loyalty seemed to mirror the ordered harmony Egyptians sought in their world. The possibility lingers that some were bred with an eye toward particular qualities, perhaps favouring those with keen sight for the chase or a calm vigilance that made them welcome in sacred spaces, though the precise intentions behind these choices stay elusive amid the layers of later interpretations. What emerges instead is a picture of dogs integrated into daily rhythms, from herding livestock along the river's edge to standing watch over homes and fields, their spiritual resonance sometimes hinted at in art that places them near deities associated with protection or the afterlife, suggesting humans saw in them not only practical allies, but reflections of enduring bonds that transcended the visible. This integration deepens when the gaze turns toward the classical worlds of Greece and Rome, where the ancient partnership found new expressions amid city-states and empires. In the Greek imagination, dogs stride through myths as faithful sentinels, their stories hinting at an awareness of human emotions that would have proven invaluable in both household and battlefield settings. One can picture them accompanying warriors on campaigns, early war dogs whose size and strength offered advantages in the chaos of phalanx formations, perhaps selected from larger stock that had proven reliable in guarding mountain passes or herding through rugged terrain. The Romans, inheriting and expanding these traditions, appear to have formalized such uses further, training dogs for military outposts along distant frontiers while also cherishing smaller varieties that curled at the feet of senators or accompanied children in villa gardens. Here the diversity of forms begins to clarify, with evidence pointing toward the emergence of distinct types shaped by local needs and preferences rather than any single deliberate program. Among these, the powerful molosses stand out as one thread, their robust build suited to the demands of war and heavy guarding, possibly tracing lines back to dogs that had accompanied migrating groups through the Balkans or Anatolia. Sighthounds, by contrast, reflect a different current, their slender frames and exceptional vision honed perhaps in the open deserts and plains, where speed could turn the tide of a hunt, a trait that may have been encouraged through informal selections favouring those quickest to spot and pursue game. Smaller lap dogs, too, surface in the record, their compact sizes and affectionate dispositions suggesting they filled quieter niches as companions within elite circles, a development that hints at how domestication's neotenic qualities could be amplified when proximity to humans became the primary survival strategy. None of these categories arose in isolation, of course, and the genetic mingling that continued with wild populations likely introduced fresh variations that humans then noticed and sometimes nurtured, creating a mosaic of forms that reflected both geography and the subtle pressures of daily use. Travelling eastward, The same partnership reveals itself in the ancient civilizations of Asia, where dogs assumed roles that blended the practical with the ceremonial. In early Chinese societies along the Yellow River, they appear in oracle bones and burial goods as hunters of deer and boar, guardians of rice fields, and sometimes participants in rituals that underscored their perceived connection to ancestral spirits or seasonal cycles. Further south in the Indus Valley and across the steppes, similar patterns emerge, with dogs possibly herding flocks through highland pastures or standing sentinel at the edges of growing settlements, their presence in art and legend hinting at cultural reverence that treated them as bridges between the human world and the unseen forces shaping it. These roles were never uniform, varying with climate and custom, yet they consistently illustrate how the early tolerance for human company could evolve into specialized utility, whether that meant navigating dense forests with traders or offering comfort in the courts of rulers who valued their alertness as much as their companionship. Archaeological traces reinforce this breadth, revealing burials where dogs rest beside or near their human counterparts across continents and eras, from the river valleys of the Near East to the tombs of the Mediterranean and the mounds of East Asia. Such arrangements invite contemplation rather than certainty. Were these animals interred as beloved partners whose spirits were thought to accompany the deceased, or as valued workers whose skills warranted honour in the next realm? The evidence permits both readings and others besides, with some sites showing dogs adorned with simple collars or placed in postures suggesting careful arrangement, while others hint at communal rites that acknowledge the shared history stretching back to those first campfires. This practice spans cultures without a single origin, suggesting that wherever humans and dogs had travelled together, the bond had grown strong enough to warrant symbolic recognition at life's end, a quiet testament to mutual dependence that persisted even as societies layered new complexities atop the old. Throughout these ancient landscapes, the working roles of dogs continued to expand in ways that echoed their earliest advantages while adapting to settled existence. Hunting remained central in many regions, yet herding gained prominence as flocks and fields multiplied, requiring dogs whose instincts for guiding and protecting could be refined through observation and occasional intervention. Guarding extended from simple camps to city gates and temple precincts, where their vigilance complemented human watchmen and perhaps lent an aura of supernatural watchfulness in the minds of those who relied on them. Spiritually, interpretations varied widely, with some societies viewing dogs as embodiments of loyalty that mirrored divine attributes, others associating them with transitions between worlds, or as protectors against unseen threats. These meanings likely arose organically from daily interactions rather than imposed doctrines, allowing room for local stories and personal attachments to shape how each community understood the animals sharing their hearths and horizons. As empires rose and fell, these threads of companionship and utility travelled along trade routes and military paths, carrying particular traits from one region to another, and fostering the gradual diversification that would later flower into the many breeds we recognise today. The possibility remains that some ancient preferences for certain sizes, coats, or temperaments planted seeds for later developments, though the record leaves ample space for chance and regional adaptation to have played equal parts. What stays clear is the continuity. The same qualities of attentiveness and adaptability that had once helped wolves thrive near human fires now supported the growth of complex societies, turning former observers into integral participants whose contributions, both tangible and intangible, helped define the rhythms of antiquity. Each new excavation or re-examined text adds nuance to this portrait, reminding us that the dogs of those distant centuries carried forward the quiet mysteries of their origins into eras that would themselves become the foundations of our own. As the ancient empires faded into memory and the landscapes of Europe settled into the rhythms of feudal life, One might stand at the edge of a torchlit hall in a stone keep and feel how the partnership between humans and dogs had deepened into something at once practical and symbolic, its threads now woven through the hierarchies of nobility and the hardships of peasant fields. In these medieval centuries, dogs served as markers of status for those who ruled, their presence in tapestries and court records suggesting they were prized not only for their utility, but as living emblems of power and lineage, while for the common folk they remained steadfast allies in the daily struggle to guard livestock and clear vermin from humble dwellings. The possibility lingers that certain lineages were already being favoured for their imposing size or steadfast loyalty, allowing lords to display them as extensions of their own authority during hunts or processions, even as the same animals worked alongside villagers to protect crops from wolves that still prowled the dark forest beyond the village palisades. From these varied roles emerged a gradual refinement of hunting hounds, their forms shaped by the demands of different terrains and quarries in ways that invited observation rather than rigid planning. One can picture slender scent hounds threading through the undergrowth of English woodlands, their voices raised in pursuit of stag or boar, while heavier mastiff-like types held the line against larger game or intruders, their strength perhaps encouraged through the informal choices of keepers who noticed which pups thrived in the chase. The development of such distinct types, from the fleet-footed gaze-hounds of continental courts to the tenacious terriers suited for burrowing after smaller prey, hints at an unspoken dialogue between human needs and canine instincts, where regional customs and the availability of game played as much a part as any deliberate selection, leaving room for chance crossings with local populations to introduce fresh variations that would later define entire strains. This evolving companionship travelled outward with the age of exploration, beginning in the 15th century when ships carried dogs across unknown oceans as both practical assets and symbols of continuity for those venturing into the unknown. In the holds of vessels bound for the Americas or the distant coasts of Asia, one might imagine these animals serving as sentinels against the unfamiliar threats of new lands, their alertness complementing human crews, while also providing comfort amid the isolation of long voyages. The records of early colonization suggest dogs played roles in establishing settlements, perhaps herding livestock on unfamiliar shores or joining expeditions into interior territories, their presence helping to bridge the gap between old worlds and new even, as they encountered indigenous canids whose lineages had followed separate paths for millennia. Such journeys invite contemplation of how these animals adapted, their coats thickening against colder climates, or their temperaments shifting in response to novel prey and landscapes, without any single narrative capturing the full mosaic of outcomes. Among the many threads of this history stand the stories of individual dogs whose lives became intertwined with human events, their fame preserved in chronicles and legends that speak to the enduring affection and utility they inspired. Royal companions appear in accounts of European courts, small lap varieties curled beside monarchs as sources of solace during times of intrigue or illness, while war heroes emerge from battlefields where larger breeds charged alongside knights or carried messages through contested terrain, their courage earning them names and sometimes even pensions in later retellings. Legendary tales, such as those surrounding faithful guardians credited with saving children or warning of invasions, blend the verifiable with the embellished, reminding us that the bond often transcended mere function to touch on deeper notions of loyalty that cultures across continents wove into their folklore, each story offering a glimpse into how particular animals could embody virtues admired by the societies they served. By the Victorian era, these ancient currents converged with new social forces to transform the very idea of what a dog could be. As systematic breeding practices took hold, and the first kennel clubs formalised standards that would shape generations to come. One might envision the drawing rooms of industrialising Britain where enthusiasts gathered to catalogue traits and establish registries, their efforts reflecting a broader fascination with order and classification that turned informal preferences into codified breeds. This period saw the rise of dog shows and pedigree records, activities that encouraged the amplification of certain features like distinctive coats or temperaments, yet they also sparked debates over whether such refinements preserved health or introduced vulnerabilities, leaving interpretive space for later observers to weigh the benefits against the costs of selective intensity. The Industrial Revolution further altered this relationship, drawing people into growing cities where the rhythms of factory work and urban living gradually shifted dogs from essential labourers to sources of companionship amid crowded tenements and rising middle-class households. As mechanization reduced the need for herding or hunting partners in many regions, the same adaptability that had once suited dogs to ancient camps now allowed them to fill quieter niches, offering affection and a sense of continuity for families navigating the dislocations of rapid change. The possibility remains that this transition varied widely by class and locale, with working breeds persisting in rural areas even as smaller varieties gained favour in parlours, their presence softening the edges of an era defined by steam and steel, while also prompting new considerations of care, training, and the emotional dimensions of shared life. Through these centuries of transition, the mosaic of canine roles continued to expand without losing sight of its origins in mutual reliance, each development layering fresh nuances onto the partnership that had begun so long ago near distant campfires. As the Industrial Revolution reshaped societies, and the first kennel clubs began to codify what had once been informal preferences, the partnership between humans and dogs entered a new chapter, one in which the ancient instincts forged near campfires met the deliberate hand of classification and display. One might imagine the bustling halls of early dog shows in Victorian Britain, where enthusiasts pored over pedigrees and measured proportions with a precision once reserved for botanical specimens, their efforts gradually giving rise to an astonishing proliferation of breeds that would, by the close of the 20th century, number more than 400 distinct varieties recognized around the world. This explosion did not emerge from a single moment of invention, but from the convergence of empire, trade, and a growing fascination with taxonomy, as dogs from distant colonies were brought back, crossed with local lines, and refined through generations of selection that amplified traits once shaped only by survival and utility. The possibility lingers that many of these new forms carried echoes of older regional types, their coats, sizes, and temperaments now standardized in ways that invited both admiration and the quiet question of whether such boundaries preserved vitality or narrowed it. From these registries flowed a profound shift in purpose, moving away from the utilitarian demands that had defined dogs for millennia, toward breeding guided by aesthetics and the quiet companionship sought in parlours and city apartments. Where once a hound's stamina or a guardian's vigilance determined its value, now the curve of an ear or the lustre of a coat could elevate a lineage, turning what had been working partners into living ornaments, whose primary labour became the offering of presence and affection. This transition unfolded unevenly across classes and continents, with rural traditions still favouring sturdy herders and hunters, even as urban households embraced smaller, more portable companions whose temperaments suited confined spaces and the rhythms of industrial schedules. One can picture the drawing rooms of expanding middle-class homes, where a once fierce terrier line might be softened through selective pairing to produce a creature more inclined to curl beside a reader than to bolt after quarry. The same adaptability that once bridged ancient worlds now allowing dogs to ease the isolation of modern life. Yet even as many dogs found their roles softening into companionship, others continued to serve in capacities that echoed their earliest alliances with humans, stepping into the demands of modern warfare where their senses and loyalty proved as vital as any mechanical device. During the great conflicts of the 20th century, dogs carried messages across shell-torn landscapes, located wounded soldiers amid the chaos of trenches, and later, in conflicts that stretched into later decades, detected explosives or navigated rubble where human reach faltered. These wartime contributions blended the ancient with the contemporary, as breeds once favoured for guarding livestock now trained to interpret commands in languages their ancestors had never heard, their performance revealing an enduring capacity for partnership that transcended the shift toward lap warmers. Search and rescue operations further extended this legacy, with dogs scaling mountains or threading through earthquake ruins guided by scents invisible to their handlers, while therapy dogs began visiting hospitals and schools, their calm presence lowering heart rates and easing anxieties in ways that suggested something deeper than mere training. The science of this bond offers glimpses into why such versatility persists, pointing to measurable exchanges of oxytocin that rise in both human and canine during moments of shared gaze or gentle contact, a hormonal dialogue that may have co-evolved over thousands of years of proximity. Researchers have observed how dogs appear to read subtle human cues, from the direction of a glance to the tone of a voice, in patterns that suggest a mutual attunement, refined across generations rather than imposed by recent selection alone. Theories differ on the precise origins of this understanding, some proposing that early wolves drawn to human settlements gradually developed heightened sensitivity to social signals, while others explore the possibility that humans themselves changed, learning to interpret canine postures and vocalizations with similar acuity. What remains clear is the reciprocal nature of the connection, where a dog's presence can modulate stress responses in its person, just as human routines shape the animal's expectations and calm, creating a loop of influence that continues to surprise observers who study it under controlled conditions. Alongside these insights, contemporary debates illuminate the complexities of the present moment, as concerns over purebred health issues arise from the very intensity of selection that produced so many varieties, with certain lines showing elevated risks of joint problems, breathing difficulties, or inherited conditions that trace back to limited genetic pools. Designer dogs, those deliberate crosses marketed for particular combinations of traits, spark further conversation about whether such creations honor the adaptability of the past or introduce new uncertainties, while adoption culture encourages the rescue of mixed-breed animals whose unknown histories often prove as resilient and affectionate as any registered pedigree. These discussions invite reflection rather than resolution, acknowledging that the same human impulse to shape dogs according to preference now carries responsibilities for welfare that earlier generations may not have confronted with equal awareness. Through all these developments, the enduring mystery of why dogs and humans fit together so precisely continues to invite contemplation, a harmony that seems to transcend utility, aesthetics, or even the measurable chemistry of shared hormones. One might wonder whether this alignment stems from parallel journeys across changing landscapes, or from an unspoken recognition that each species offers the other a form of completion, dogs providing vigilance and uncomplicated presence, while humans supply shelter, variety, and the stories that turn ordinary animals into companions across lifetimes. As the centuries have layered new roles upon the old without erasing their origins, the partnership stands as a living thread connecting distant campfires to modern homes, its full depth perhaps never fully captured by any single account, yet always available for those who pause to notice the quiet understanding exchanged in a shared glance or a moment of rest. If these reflections on the long journey from wolves to lap warmers have stirred your curiosity about the animals beside us, I invite you to like this video Leave a comment below telling us where you're listening from, and subscribe for more explorations into the histories that shape our world.